Hi, my name is Alex. Today, I'll tell you a story about a girl who aged out of foster care with nothing, and a hidden inheritance that uncovered a truth her family tried to bury for years.
At 18, with $41 and a garbage bag of clothes, Mia Callahan walked into a storage lot to claim the only thing her grandfather left her, an old school bus that had not moved in 6 years. Her grandfather, Walter, had raised her on that bus, driving from town to town, fixing whatever was broken for whoever asked. He taught her one rule above all others: you don't walk past someone who needs help. Then his mind started to fail, and the state took her away when she was 12. He died in a care home while she was still in foster care. Nobody told her for months. The woman who ran the storage lot had been paying the bus's storage fee out of her own pocket, just to keep it from being crushed for scrap. But when Mia climbed inside and pulled back the broken seat behind the driver, she found something nobody knew was there. That part comes later. First, you need to see where she started. On the morning Mia turned 18, her foster mother put an envelope on the kitchen table and handed her a pen. "Sign at the bottom," she said. Both pages. Mia signed. Her foster mother slid the papers into a folder and said she needed the room ready for the next kid by 5. That was the whole goodbye. No cake, no hug, nothing pretended. Just paperwork and a deadline. Mia went upstairs and packed. It did not take long. 3 shirts, a pair of boots with the soles wearing thin, a toothbrush, and a small brass locket she had worn since she was 4 years old. There was no photo inside it. There never had been. Everything she owned fit into one black garbage bag. She slung it over her shoulder and walked out the front door while her foster mother was already on the phone talking about the next placement. The bus ride across town took 20 minutes. Mia had made this same trip to school for 6 years, but today she noticed things she never had before: a cracked sidewalk, a fence someone had painted over, a dog barking behind a gate. 6 years in that neighborhood, and she was already a stranger to it. Nobody looked up when she walked past. In her pocket, she had $41, a bus pass, and a letter from the county probate office. It said one item from her grandfather's estate was still sitting unclaimed at a storage facility. A 1994 school bus, converted. Unit 14. She read that letter 3 times on the ride over. One item. Her grandfather's whole life reduced to a single line on government paper. The storage lot sat behind a tire shop, wrapped in chain-link fencing. The office was a small trailer with a handwritten sign that said "back in 10 minutes." After almost half an hour, a woman came around the side of the trailer carrying a bag of mulch on her shoulder. She was maybe 60, sturdy, with short gray hair and tired eyes that still looked kind. "Can I help you?" the woman asked. "I'm here about Unit 14, Mia said. "The bus." The woman set the mulch down and studied her for a moment. The garbage bag, the worn boots, the locket around her neck. "You're Walter's girl," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I'm his granddaughter," Mia said. "I got a letter from probate. It says the bus is mine if I want it. It's been yours for 6 years, honey. I am Diane. I run this place. Come on, I'll show you where it's parked." Diane led her past rows of padlocked units to a corner of the lot where the bus sat under a rusted metal roof. The yellow paint had faded almost to white. The tires were flat, and weeds had grown up thick around the wheels. "Your grandfather parked it here himself," Diane said, "the day the state came for you. Handed me the key and said he'd be back for it soon." She paused. "That was the last time I ever saw him standing up straight and steady." "What happened to him after that?" Mia asked. "I don't know all of it," Diane admitted. "I know he ended up in a memory care home somewhere in the county. I tried calling a few times to check on him, but they told me only family could get information. And I guess it was his nephew handling all of that." "Craig," Mia said quietly. "I don't know the name. I just know it wasn't you making the decisions, and that never sat right with me." Mia stood in front of the bus for a long moment before she used the key. She knew every dent on it. The one above the back wheel where Walter had backed into a mailbox in Kentucky. The strip of blue tape on the side mirror She had stuck there herself at age 7 because she thought it looked fast. She had not seen the bus since the day the state took her. She had been 12, standing outside while a social worker explained that her grandfather was sick and needed care, and that she was going somewhere else. 2 different vans, 2 different lives. Walter had looked at her through the ambulance window and said, "I'll come back for you, Bird." That was the last clear sentence he ever said to her. Mia could still remember exactly how Walter had taught her things back when the bus was the only home she knew. She remembered being 6, standing beside him under the hood of a stranger's stalled car on the side of a highway in Ohio, handing him wrenches one at a time, because he could tell her which size just by holding out his palm. She remembered being 9, sanding a chair legs smooth for 2 straight hours because he told her a job wasn't finished until your hands agreed it was finished, not your eyes. And she remembered, more than anything, the one rule he repeated in more towns than she could count. You don't walk past someone who needs help. He said it the night they stopped for a stranded family with a flat tire at midnight in the rain. He said it the day he gave away his last $20 of gas money to a man crying outside a gas station because his kid was sick. He said it so many times that by the time she was 10, she had started saying it back to him before he could even finish the sentence, and he would laugh and muss her hair and tell her she was already smarter than he was. Those were the good years, the bus rattling down back roads, Walter humming old country songs under his breath, the smell of coffee and engine grease that never quite left his hands. She had believed, the way only a child can believe something completely, that it would always be like that. One memory stayed with her clearer than the rest. She was 11, near the end, riding along on a supply run when Walter pulled the bus over for an old woman standing at a bus stop in the rain with 3 bags of groceries and no ride home. He didn't ask where she lived before he opened the door. He just said, "Get in out of the wet," and drove 20 minutes out of their way down roads he'd never seen, humming the whole time like it was nothing. When they dropped her off, the woman tried to press a $5 bill into his hand, and he folded her fingers back around it and said the ride was free, ma'am, always is. Mia had asked him afterward how he decided who to help, since he couldn't help everybody. He'd thought about it a long time before he answered. "You don't decide, Bird," he said. "You just don't drive past." They rolled through a dozen small towns like that over the years, towns whose names Mia could no longer keep straight. But she remembered the shape of them all the same. A stalled truck outside a diner in one, a leaking roof on a church in another, a kid's bike Walter rebuilt from spare parts in a third because the boy's family couldn't afford a new one. He never stayed long enough anywhere to be thanked properly, and that seemed to be exactly how he liked it. "How much does he owe you?" Mia asked Diane. "For all these years of storage?" "Nothing," Diane said. 6 years can't be nothing. $60 a month, Diane said. "I've been covering it myself." "Why would you do that?" "Your grandfather fixed my furnace once, fixed my truck twice, rebuilt my back porch, and never once let me pay him what the work was actually worth." She pulled a small brass key from her pocket, worn smooth with age. "I figured I owed him more than $60 a month." "Go on. Take your time in there." The bus door creaked open. The smell hit Mia first. Old vinyl, engine oil, and underneath it something she recognized instantly from being a small kid riding shotgun while Walter drove from one town to the next looking for someone who needed a hand. Inside, Walter had torn out the old bus seats years ago and built a tiny home instead. A narrow bed against one wall, a fold-down table, cabinets made from scrap wood he had sanded smooth so she would never get splinter. Dust covered everything, but it was all still there. On the doorframe near the driver's seat, she found pencil marks, a line for every birthday, marking how tall she had grown. The last one read 4'8", age 11, the year Walter had started forgetting things. She ran her hand along the cabinets. The 2-burner stove was still bolted to its little shelf. Walter used to make eggs on that stove every single morning, plain on weekdays, and what he called Sunday eggs, which are just the same eggs with a little cheese, but he said it like it was something special. She used to sit at that fold-down table and watch him cook while morning light came through the curtains. And those were some of the safest minutes of her whole life. She sat down in the driver's seat. It creaked under her. Through the dusty windshield, she could see Diane standing near the trailer, pretending not to watch. Mia put both hands on the steering wheel, and for just a second, she was 8 years old again, sitting on Walter's lap while he let her steer down a quiet dirt road, his hands over hers, his voice saying, "Steady now, you've got it." The seat right behind the driver was different from the rest. Walter had always said it was structural, that it held up part of the frame, and he told her never mess with it. One of the only real rules he ever gave her. The vinyl on, it was more cracked than anywhere else in the bus. She crouched beside it and worked her fingers under the torn cover. Underneath the frame, bolted down, was a small metal box. Dark green, about the size of shoebox, with a latch rusted almost shut. Her hands went still on the latch for a moment before she pried it open. Walter had told her never to touch this seat for 11 years, and some old habit made her hesitate even now, sitting alone in a bus that belonged to nobody but her. Outside, she could hear Diane moving boxes around near the trailer, giving her privacy without being asked to. Mia took a breath and worked the latch loose. Inside, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, were 4 things. A leather journal with a soft, cracked cover, a bank book with a rubber band around it, a folded piece of paper with an official county seal, and a plain white envelope with 2 words written on the front in Walter's shaky handwriting, for Mia. She opened the bank book first. Small deposits, written in Walter's own hand, going back 18 years. $50, 75, 100, 20, over and over, one deposit at a time. The final balance stopped her cold, $23,411. The account was in her name. Next, she unfolded the paper with the county seal. It was a property deed, a 1/4 acre of land in a small town 4 hours south called Havenfield. The deed was dated from 12 years earlier, when she was only 6 years old, and it was in her name too. Her hands were shaking by the time she opened the journal. The first page, in Walter's careful handwriting, read, "Bought the land today." There's a creek at the back. Mia would love it. Going to build her a rail house, 4 walls and a roof that doesn't have wheels under it. She flipped through more pages. Poured the foundation this weekend. Framing's up, 4 rooms, and I put her bedroom window facing east so she gets the morning light. She's always been a morning person, just like her mother. Mia had almost never heard Walter mention her mother. Every time she'd asked as a kid, he would go quiet and find something to fix. All she really knew came from one person, Walter's nephew, Craig, who had told her, standing in a parking lot the day the ambulance took Walter away, that her mother had simply walked out on her as a baby and never looked back. She had carried that story for 6 years. It had shaped every question she never asked, every time a foster family wondered about her background. And now Walter's own journal was telling her something completely different, a warm sentence, written like he loved the woman he was talking about. She did not open the white envelope yet. It felt heavier than paper should, and it felt like a final word she wasn't ready for. She carried everything out to Diane, who was sitting on the trailer step with a thermos of coffee. Diane read the bank book balance, then the deed, then looked up at Mia without saying anything for a moment. "That old man was building you a house," Diane finally said, "and you had no idea." "None of it," Mia said. "I didn't know any of this existed until today." Diane sat with that for a second, running her thumb over the balance in the bank book. "You know how long it takes to save that kind of money doing odd mechanic work, $50 at a time? That man was saving for you before you could even tie your own shoes." Diane told her what Walter had said the day he dropped the bus off 6 years earlier. If his girl ever came looking for it, give her the key, and don't let anyone crush it for scrap. 6 years, Diane said. He was betting on you showing up. Mia looked at the deed again. A quarter-acre of land, a house Walter had started but never finished, 4 hours away in a town she had never seen. And she had $41, a garbage bag, and no address that would last past 5 o'clock that afternoon. "I can drive you there," Diane said, standing up and grabbing a set of keys. "I can have you there by dark." "You don't even know me," Mia said. "I knew Walter. That's enough for me." An hour into the drive, Mia was still flipping through the same 3 pages of the journal, watching Walter's handwriting get steadier as the house took shape, as if the work itself was holding his mind together. "I'm trying to understand the timeline," Mia said quietly. "He bought the land when I was 6, started building when I was 7, got the frame and half a roof up before his mind started going." Diane finished. "Yeah," Mia said. She kept reading, searching now for anything about her mother. The entries were scattered between measurements and lumber lists, but every so often something else slipped through. Mia's birthday today, 10 years old. Made her a cake on the bus stove, and it came out flat on one side. She ate 2 pieces anyway, and said it was the best cake she'd ever had. She's got her mother's exact smile. A few pages later, Mia asked me today why we never stay anywhere long. Told her home isn't a place you park, it's a place you build. She said that didn't make sense since we don't build anything. We just drive. Didn't have an answer for that one. Guess that's why I finally bought the land. And further along, in handwriting just slightly less steady than before, Craig came by again today, asking for money. 3rd time this year. Gave him $200 I don't really have, because he's family, and that's what you do. But I worry about that boy. He's always been scared of not having enough, scared of being the one who gets left behind. I try to tell him once that fear like that doesn't protect you. It just makes you take from the people closest to you. He didn't hear me. Maybe someday he will. He's not a bad man. He's just a frightened one, and I don't know how to fix that. A few pages later, the handwriting changed, smaller, pressed harder into the paper. Drove past the church today where Lily used to sing in the choir. Mia was asleep in the back. I almost woke her up to show her. What would I even say? This is where your mother sang before she died. The girl doesn't even know she's dead. Mia read that last line 3 times. The girl doesn't even know she's dead. Her hands went still on the page. "You okay?" Diane asked, glancing over. "Pull over," Mia said. Diane eased the truck onto the shoulder. Mia held the journal out so she could read it too. "That's not what Craig told her," Diane said slowly. "It wasn't a question. Craig told me she left," Mia said, her voice flat. "That she walked out when I was a baby and never wanted me." "You believe what's written here?" "It's Walter's handwriting," Mia said. "He never lied to me. He never told me everything." They sat on the shoulder while cars passed. Mia read the entry one more time, closed the journal, and set on the dashboard. "Let's keep going," she said. Diane pulled back onto the road without another word. They crossed into farm country as the sun started to drop. Diane turned down a gravel road, checking the deed against a mailbox with no name on it. The lot sat at the end of the road, a quarter-acre with old oak trees on 3 sides and a creek running along the back, exactly like the journal said. The grass had grown waist-high, and rising out of the overgrowth was the frame of a house. Diane stopped the truck. They both sat there looking at it. The foundation looked solid, even from the road. The framing stood on all 4 walls. The roof was half-shingled, with tar paper showing through on the unfinished side. 6 years of weather had turned the wood gray, but the bones of the place were still standing straight and true. "He got further than I expected," Diane said. Before the gravel road, they had stopped for gas in the small town of Havenfield itself. 1 blinking light, a diner, a hardware store, a church with a hand-painted sign that read "All are welcome." Diane went inside to ask directions, even though the address was clear enough, because in a town that size, asking directions was really just another way of finding out what people knew. The woman behind the diner counter, gray-haired and quick-eyed, looked up when Diane mentioned the name Callahan, and set down her coffee pot. Old Walter's place, she said. Nobody's been up that road in years. She studied Mia for a long moment, the way people do when they're deciding whether to say more. He used to come through here for lumber every other weekend, she said finally. Kvietman. Always left a good tip even when the bill was small, and always paid before he ate, like he wasn't sure he'd still be there to pay it after. Mia asked if she'd known him well. Nobody knew him well, the woman said. That was sort of the point of him. But everybody around here's got a small kindness with his name on it somewhere, if you ask around long enough. She topped off Mia's coffee without being asked and wouldn't take money for it. Family discount, she said, even though we just met. Mia climbed out and walked through the tall grass. The evening air smelled like cut hay and creek water. She stepped through the open door frame and stood inside. 4 rooms, just like the journal described. Kitchen on one side, living room on the other, 2 bedrooms down a short hallway. The east-facing window was the one Walter had built for her, so she would wake up in the morning light. You built this by hand, she said quietly to the empty room. Every single weekend. And you never said a word. He said plenty. A voice answered from behind her. Just nod to you. Mia turned. An older woman stood at the edge of the lot, silver hair pulled back, a flashlight in one hand. You're Mia, the woman said. It wasn't a question either. How do you know my name? Because your grandfather talked about you every weekend for 5 years straight. I'm Helen. I lived just through those trees. Helen studied Mia's face for a long moment. Lord, she said softly, you look just like your mother. Something tightened behind Mia's ribs. You knew her? Knew of her, Helen said. Walter talked about Lily the way some people talk about prayer, with real reverence. Helen stepped inside and looked around at the framing. He was so proud of this place, she said. Every time he drove down, he'd stop at my house first for coffee and show me his plans for the weekend. Porch railing, window trim. He had a list 2 pages long on a yellow legal pad. When was the last time he came down? Mia asked. About 6 years ago, Helen said. He showed up on a Friday like always, but something was off. He couldn't find his tools. Kept asking me the same question over and over about where he'd parked. Then Sunday morning, he knocked on my door and asked who I was. She paused. I called his nephew. Craig came and got him that same day. That was the last time I ever saw your grandfather. Craig took his tools, Mia guessed. No, Helen said, shaking her head firmly. His tools are sitting in my garage right now. He carried them over himself the night before Craig arrived, 1 box at a time, in the dark. And when he set the last one down, he told me, hold on to these for Mia, like he already knew what was coming. 6 years, Mia said softly. 6 years and 3 months, Helen said. I counted. That man planned for everything, Diane said, except how to tell this girl the truth. They walked through the unfinished house together while the sky turned dark violet outside the open window frames. When they reached the small bedroom Walter had built for her, Mia finally asked the question she'd been carrying since the truck. Helen, my mother, what really happened to her? Helen sat down slowly on a stack of old lumber. Car accident, she said gently. Lily was a nurse. She was driving home from a night shift in bad winter weather and went off a bridge. You were 3 years old, asleep at home with Walter. Mia leaned against the door frame of the bedroom built just for her. Walter picked you up the next morning, Helen continued, and told you your mama went on a trip. And then days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into years, and he never found the right moment to tell a 3-year-old that her mother wasn't coming back. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He put you on that bus and drove from town to town, fixing things, keeping you close. Did you ever meet her? Mia asked. My mother. Once, Helen said, smiling a little despite everything. She came out here with Walter one summer before you were born, helped him clear the brush off this very lot. Loudest laugh I ever heard on a woman that small. She used to say she wanted a house with trees and a creek and room enough for a kid to run. Helen looked around at the bare studs. I think that's part of why he built it exactly here. Mia was quiet for a moment. Nobody ever told me she wanted anything, she finally said. I always just pictured her as someone who didn't. That was never true, Helen said firmly. Not for one single day. And Craig, Mia asked. Why would he tell me she left? I don't know his reasons, Helen said carefully. Maybe it seemed simpler than the truth. But your grandfather let that lie stand because he never figured out how to undo it. It only got harder with every year that passed. He had years, Mia said. He could have told me the truth any time. He could have, Helen agreed. Your grandfather could fix an engine with his eyes closed, but he could never make himself say the word dead to the child he loved most in the world. He thought if he built you a solid house and saved you some money, it might make up for the things he never said out loud. Does it? Diane asked quietly from the doorway. Mia looked around the bare wooden frame of her bedroom. The window facing east, the pencil marks on the header where Walter had measured twice before every cut. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Over dinner that night, soup and bread at Helen's kitchen table, a lamp humming overhead, Helen told her own piece of it. My husband Harold and I lost the farm 2 winters running back in the 80s, she said. Bank was set to take the equipment, and Walter showed up out of nowhere with a truck full of parts he'd scavenged from 3 different junkyards and rebuilt our old thresher for the cost of the bolts. Wouldn't take a dime past that. Said machines shouldn't sit broken just because the people who own them are broke too. Harold cried that night, and Harold did not cry easy. Diane, sitting across the table, nodded slowly like she recognized the shape of the story even if she'd never heard this exact version of it. That's just who he was, Diane said. You'd think a man that generous would have had somebody looking out for him the same way. Helen's face went quiet. That's the trouble with people like Walter, she said. They spend so long being the one who shows up that nobody ever thinks to ask if he needs somebody to show up for him. By the time anybody noticed he was slipping, he'd already started forgetting how to ask. Mia sat with that for a long moment, turning her spoon in the bowl without eating. I didn't even know he was sick until it was already over, she said quietly. None of us did. Soon enough to matter, Helen said. That's the guilt this whole town's been carrying since. Maybe that's part of why they're going to show up for you the way they never showed up for him. People get one chance to fix a thing like that, and most of them know it. Helen offered them both a place to sleep that night, and Mia lay awake for a long time afterward, thinking about everything she had learned in a single day. In the morning, she was back at the house before 6, carrying Walter's old tools from Helen's garage. A framing hammer with tape around the handle. A speed square worn silver from years of use. Everything clean, oiled, and ready to work. Walter had kept his tools in better shape than most people kept their cars. At the bottom of one toolbox, she found a yellow legal pad. 2 pages of Walter's handwriting listing every remaining task on the house, with rough costs written beside each one. Roofing, windows, wiring, insulation, drywall, plumbing, paint. The total at the bottom was circled, $8,000 for $100. She had $23,000 sitting in the bank. More than enough. Before she started on the roof, she made one more trip into town to the small brick library across from the diner, because Helen's version of her mother, warm as it was, still left more silence than Mia could stand to sit inside. The librarian, a soft-spoken man who introduced himself as Ellis, helped her dig through old county newspaper archives on a microfilm machine that groaned like it hadn't been used in years. It took most of an afternoon, but she found it, a short article from January, 16 years back, about a nurse from the county hospital who had gone off the Paint Creek Bridge in icy conditions coming home from a night shift. Survived by a young daughter and her father-in-law. No photograph, just 11 lines of newsprint that made her mother's whole life fit into a single paragraph, the same way the probate letter had once done to her grandfather's. Underneath it, stapled to the back of the folder by some long-ago clerk who apparently couldn't bear to throw it away, was a photocopy of a thank you letter the hospital had printed in its newsletter that spring, written by a family whose premature baby had made it through the winter because of the extra shifts one particular nurse had quietly volunteered to cover. The nurse's name was Lily Callahan. Ellis let Mia keep both pages. Sometimes people come in here looking for a ghost, he said, and leave finding out the ghost had a whole life nobody wrote down properly. Glad it wasn't just a headline for you. She spent the whole morning finishing the roof, laying shingles from the bottom up while her shoulders burned and her hands blistered around a hammer. By afternoon, word had already started spreading through the small town that Walter Callahan's granddaughter had shown up and was finishing the house he never got to complete. A local hardware store owner named Sam drove out that same week after hearing the story, looked at the framing, and told her plainly, "Your grandfather did good work. Frames are plumb. Corners are true. Finish it right, and this house will stand for 100 years." He gave her a part-time job at his store on the spot and refused to let her pay full price for a single board. The first real test came 2 weeks in, on a Tuesday night when the sky opened up without warning. Mia woke to the sound of water hitting the plywood subfloor in the back bedroom, the one section of roof she hadn't gotten to yet. She spent the next 4 hours in the dark with a flashlight clenched in her teeth, hauling buckets and stretching a borrowed tarp across the gap while the wind tried to rip it out of her hands. By morning, she was soaked through, exhausted, and staring at a warped section of subfloor that would need to be torn out and replaced before she could do anything else. She sat on the porch steps as the storm cleared and, for the first time since the storage lot, let herself cry. Not loudly, just a slow, leaking kind of crying that came from being tired in a way sleep wouldn't fix. She thought about handing the keys back to the county. Then she thought about the pencil marks on the bus door frame, every birthday Walter had measured, and she got up because that was the only thing she'd ever known how to do with being tired. Get up anyway. She was still ripping out warped plywood when Sam's truck pulled up unannounced that afternoon, a roll of tar paper and 2 of his regular customers riding in the back. Heard about the storm from the diner, he said, like that explained everything, which in a town that size it did. After that, the town seemed to show up on its own. A man dropped off a truckload of lumber because Walter had once fixed his well pump for almost nothing. A retired electrician named Gus spent 2 Saturdays running wire through the walls for free and refused gas money both times. A woman from the next farm over named Patty brought rolls of insulation and a casserole dish she said Mia could just keep. A diner owner in town, who had been skeptical of the whole story at first and told Sam plainly that no 18-year-old finishes a house alone, started sending up the day's last pie every Friday once he saw the new shingles going on with his own eyes. Even the town's one skeptic came around eventually, which was how Helen said it always went. People needed to see the work before they believed the story. A plumber named Ortiz, who'd never met Walter but had heard the story secondhand from his brother-in-law, spent a Saturday running pipe for the bathroom and kitchen for the cost of parts, and left a business card on the counter that said, "Call me if anything leaks, no charge, ever." A retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Voss showed up with a box of secondhand curtains and a casserole and stayed to help Mia paint the bedroom trim, talking the entire time about a shy boy she'd taught decades ago who used to disappear every few months and come back talking about a man who lived on a bus and knew everything about engines. "That was probably one of yours," Mia told her, and Mrs. Voss's hands went still on the paintbrush for a moment before she kept going, blinking fast. Nobody asked for anything back. They just came, worked for a few hours, and left. Helen said it best one evening on the porch. People don't forget kindness. They just wait for the chance to return it. By the second month, Mia had stopped being surprised by who showed up. She'd started keeping her own list, the way Walter once had, jotting names down on the back of a shipping receipt, just so she wouldn't forget who to thank. It was a shorter list than his, but it was hers, and it was growing. Every night, Mia read a little more of Walter's journal by flashlight. Some entries were about lumber and measurements. Others were small and quiet. Taught Mia to change a tire today. She's 9, and she did the whole thing in 11 minutes, better than most grown men I've worked with. Another read. Mia asked me tonight why I always stop for strangers on the road. Told her because nobody ever stopped for me when I was young and needed it, and I decided a long time ago I wouldn't be that kind of man. She just nodded like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Maybe to her it already was. A week before the drywall went up, a different car had already come up that gravel road once. The same dark sedan that would return later with a lawyer. That first time, Craig had come alone, and instead of papers he had brought a number. He stood at the edge of the unfinished porch and told her he knew a developer 2 counties over who would pay real cash for a 1/4 acre with road access, more money than she'd ever held in her life, enough to skip all of this and start somewhere easier. Mia looked at the framing Walter had built board by board, and at the pencil marks on the door frame marking every year she'd grown, and she told Craig no before he even finished his sentence. It would have been so easy to take the money and walk away from 6 years of grief in one signature. She thought about it for exactly as long as it took to say the word no out loud, and then she went back to work. If you made it this far into Mia's story, go ahead and hit subscribe, because what happens next is the part I've genuinely been waiting to tell you. 26 days after she arrived, the house had real walls. Not just studs, but finished drywall that made a solid sound when she knocked her knuckles against it. She stood in the living room, and for the first time, she could actually see what Walter had seen all those years ago. She was taping drywall seams in the kitchen when she heard an unfamiliar car pull up outside. Not a work truck, a sedan with city plates. The man who stepped out was in his mid-40s, thinning hair, carrying a briefcase like it belonged to someone important. "Hello again, Mia," Craig said. This time, he wasn't alone. A man in a gray suit got out of the passenger side, carrying a leather folder. A lawyer, Mia guessed immediately. "You've been busy," Craig said, glancing at the new roof and the wiring meter on the side of the house. "Walter built it," she said. "I'm just finishing it." "With whose money?" Craig asked. "Mine, the account Walter set up." Craig opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "That account is technically part of Walter's estate," he said, "and I'm the executor, which means I have standing to challenge how those funds in that land are being used. You made yourself the executor after Walter couldn't think clearly enough to object," Mia said. "He never chose you for anything." "That's not how estate law works," Craig said. He told her he had already filed paperwork with the county to freeze the bank account and review the deed, and that his lawyer would be handling everything from here. Then he got back in his car and drove off, leaving dust hanging in the air behind him. What Mia didn't see, driving away that afternoon, was Craig sitting in his car at the bottom of the gravel road for almost 10 minutes before he could make himself pull onto the highway. He had a phone call to make, and he'd been putting it off all week. "The bank," he said when the line picked up. "I need another extension on the payment. I know how many I've asked for." He listened for a long time, jaw tight, knuckles white on the wheel. "There's a piece of family property," he said finally. "It's tied up right now, but it won't be for long." He hung up before whoever was on the other end could ask a question he didn't have an answer to, and sat there while longer with his forehead against the steering wheel before he finally drove away. It would be weeks before Mia learned any of this, and by then it would change the way she remembered every version of him she thought she'd already figured out. Mia went straight back to taping the kitchen wall. When she finished that wall, she started on the next one. The next morning, Helen came through the trees carrying a manila envelope, walking faster than Mia had ever seen her move. "Sam called me," Helen said. He heard Craig asking around town about the county clerk's office. "I should have given you this the very first night, but I didn't want to scare you before you'd even unpacked." Inside the envelope were 3 documents. The first was a notarized letter from the bank confirming that Mia's account was a custodial savings account, money that legally belonged to her the moment Walter deposited it, not to his estate. The second was a certified copy of the property deed, recorded in Mia's name a full 18 months before Craig ever obtained any legal authority over Walter's affairs. Power of attorney, Helen explained, cannot reach backward in time. It can't touch what was already given away. The third was a short letter, handwritten by Walter, addressed to Helen the same weekend he'd dropped off his tools. If Craig ever comes looking for what's Mia's, it read, show him these papers. The dates are on her side. That's all I'm asking. He planned for this, Mia said quietly. He planned for everything he possibly could. 3 days later, Craig came back, this time with a lawyer trailing behind him. Helen arrived at the same moment, papers already in hand, and Sam pulled up right behind her. The lawyer read through everything carefully and, after a long minute, told Craig plainly that the account and the deed were both clean, both transferred to Mia long before his authority ever existed. Craig had nothing. Word of the second visit had traveled faster than Craig's car. By the time the lawyer finished speaking, 2 more trucks had pulled up at the bottom of the gravel road. Mrs. Voss, still in her gardening clothes, and Ortiz the plumber, still holding a wrench like he'd come straight from a job. They didn't say much. They just stood at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, watching. Mrs. Voss finally spoke up, her voice steady despite her age. I taught half this county's children, she said, looking at Craig, and I have never once seen a young woman work as hard as this one has for something that was rightfully hers to begin with. You should be ashamed of yourself for making her prove it twice. Ortiz just nodded once, like that settled it, as far as he was concerned. Craig stood there a long moment, staring at the unfinished house, and something in his face finally cracked open. I'm broke, he admitted quietly. I sold Walter's furniture. I sold his truck. I've been underwater on debt for 3 years, and when I found that account, I told myself it was owed to me. And the lie about my mother, Mia asked, was that owed to you too? Craig went very still. You were 12, he finally said, standing in that parking lot asking me what was happening, and I panicked. Saying she left felt easier than saying she died. And once I'd said it, it got harder to take back every single year that passed. My mother was a nurse, Mia said evenly. She worked night shifts. She died on an icy road coming home to me. I spent 6 years thinking she didn't want me, because you panicked once in a parking lot and never fixed it. Craig had nothing left to say to that. He got back in his car and drove away, and this time nobody watched him go. The house was fully finished by early autumn. New paint the same yellow as the old bus, glass in every window, water running hot and cold. Mia kept working part-time at Sam's hardware store, and in her free hours, she started fixing things for anyone in town who needed help, exactly the way Walter always had. A neighbor's lawnmower, a leaking gutter, a stuck kitchen faucet. When people tried to pay her, she told them what Walter used to say, the work is the payment. One afternoon, a teenager she barely knew from school pulled up with steam pouring out from under the hood of an old pickup truck. She had it fixed in 20 minutes with tools from Walter's own box. How much do I owe you? The kid asked, already reaching for his wallet. Help somebody when you get the chance, Mia said. That's how much. It was the same answer Walter used to give, word for word, and saying it out loud for the first time felt like putting on a coat that already fit. By September, the town had started calling the place Walter's house without anyone deciding it officially. People who had never once climbed the hill toward the old lot now drove out on Sunday afternoons just to see how far along it had come, and every one of them left something behind. A jar of preserves, a spare box of nails, an hour of free labor. Helen said it reminded her of the barn raisings her own grandmother used to talk about. Except this time it was one girl and one house instead of a whole community starting from scratch. One quiet Sunday morning, she finally sat down at the kitchen table and opened the white envelope she had been putting off for weeks. Inside was a folded letter in Walter's careful handwriting, along with a small, worn photograph. The letter explained everything the journal already had: the money, the land, his reasons for staying quiet for so long. And it ended with words that stayed with her long after she folded the paper back up. A home isn't where you park. It's where somebody built something just for you. That's what this house is, Mia. My something for you. I love you, bird. The photograph showed a young woman on a porch step, laughing, holding a baby who was reaching up toward her chin. On the back, in faded ink, Lily and Mia, first summer. Mia opened the brass locket she had worn since she was 4 years old, the one that had never held a photo, and carefully folded the picture inside. It was a tight fit, but it closed. For the first time in her life, the locket wasn't empty. Weeks later, Craig showed up one more time, this time with a plain cardboard box instead of briefcase. Inside were her mother's things, old photographs, a thin necklace, and a birthday card Lily had written for Mia's very first birthday, one Craig had been holding onto out of habit for years. Mia read the card alone that evening on the porch, and she let herself cry. Not because she was sad, but because for the first time she understood, fully and completely, that she had always been wanted. The old bus arrived a few weeks after that. Diane arranged the tow herself and wouldn't accept a single dollar for it. It sat in the yard now, faded and quiet beside the freshly painted house. The place where Mia had survived, standing right next to the place she was always meant to end up. One evening in late October, headlights turned up the gravel road just as the sun was going down. A boy climbed out, maybe 17, carrying everything he owned in a single backpack. He stood at the edge of the yard, unsure, the same way Mia once had. Somebody in town said there might be a place to stay out here. He said quietly, "I don't have anywhere else to go tonight." "What's your name?" Mia asked. "Danny," he said. "What's the catch? Nobody just gives somebody a bed for nothing." "Somebody gave me one once," Mia said. "Woman I'd never met before drove me 4 hours in her own truck and never asked for a thing back. Took me a long time to understand there wasn't a catch. There still isn't one here." Mia looked at him for a long moment and then stepped back from the door the way Diane once had for her. "You stay, you eat," she said. "That's the whole deal. It's the only one I've ever known how to offer anybody. You don't walk past someone who needs help. Somebody taught me that on a school bus a long time ago, and I've never found a better rule since." The boy hesitated at the gate, the way people do when they've learned that nothing good ever comes free. Then he picked up his bag and walked through anyway. Danny stayed. The first week he barely spoke, eating quickly and disappearing into the small guest room Mia had finished just that spring, the same way she remembered flinching at every unexpected kindness in her own first week somewhere new. She didn't push. She just left food out, kept the porch light on, and let him find his own way to trusting the place the way she once had to. On his 10th night, she caught him standing in the hallway looking at the pencil marks Walter had made on the old bus door frame, which she'd carefully pried loose, board and all, and mounted on the wall of the new house like a piece of art too important to lose. "What's all this?" he asked. "Every year I grew up on that bus. Marked right there," she said. "My grandfather did it." Danny studied the lowest marks, the ones from when she was small, and didn't say anything else that night. 2 mornings later, she found him at the kitchen table with a pencil, practicing his signature on a scrap of paper like he was getting ready for something. She didn't ask what. Some things a person needs to work up to on their own schedule, and she of all people knew better than to rush it. That night, Mia sat out on the porch alone while after the house had gone quiet, the locket warm against her chest, the creek running steady behind the trees. She thought about a rusted bus, a hidden bank book, a lie that took 6 years to undo, and a grandfather who never learned how to say the hardest sentence out loud. So he built an entire house to say it for him instead. She had spent her whole life believing home was something other people had and kept from her. It took a rusted bus, a locked box, and $41 to teach her otherwise. Home isn't the place that keeps you, she thought. It's the place you decide to keep, and the door you decide to leave open for whoever comes looking next.